And then we'll put it on speaker view.
Great.
Literally just a second ago. Yeah. Wait, what?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah. We're just gonna let folks in. Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to actually ask that Councilor Mejia be unmuted at this time as well. Perfect. Good morning. I am Tanisha Sullivan. I'm president of the NAACP Boston branch. Super excited to be with you all this morning. Excited to be with our host for today, City Councilor Julia Mejia, for this important conversation, community conversation. It is, it's actually, I was gonna say it's the first, but it's really not the first. It's actually a continuation of conversation that we've been engaged in for quite some time. But we're gonna work, Councilor Mejia, to get a better cadence on this, because you know we've been at this for a minute, but we're gonna work to make this even more frequent, the Black and Brown breakdown, because there's so much for us to talk about. There's so much for us to collaborate on. There's so much shared experience, shared hope, shared destiny, shared purpose between our communities, the Black community and the Latinx community, that we need to have more of this. So super excited that we're here this morning. Want to welcome everyone who is in the Zoom meeting with us live, and then those who are joining us on Facebook. This is going to be hopefully an interactive conversation that folks will not only kind of spur conversation this morning, but also hopefully spark conversation going forward. That's what this is about. So I want to introduce introduce, present, you know how they do. Introduce to some, present to others. Our dynamic City Councilor at Large, Julia Mejia, my sister. I'm so super proud of you and the work that you're doing. It's hard to believe that you are in your first year of your first term. What a wild and crazy year it has been. But I will say it's also been such a year of hope. My goodness, with everything that's going on. So with that, I wanna pass the mic.
Thank you, Tanisha. I'm always incredibly humbled to just be in your presence, because every time you get quoted in some newspaper, I'm like, I want to sound just like her.
Girl.
If anyone brings fire to the table and is out here doing the work, it is you. And I'm so grateful to be doing this in partnership with you. And you're right, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, we were at the Haley House talking about the Black and Brown breakdown and how important it is for us to move beyond these conversations and to really push people outside of their comfort zone to get real about what we're gonna do to liberate our people, right? And so the fact that we're in this position in this day and time is just like super, super inspiring. And I think that we have a responsibility and we have an opportunity to seize this moment to shift the way we work in community, the way we work with each other, the way everything comes down. Because at the end of the day, everything begins and ends with those who are living the realities and doing the work. So I think that we can create a really great blueprint and framework for what a community-centered approach looks like when it comes to policymaking, how we have these tough conversations with our community about engagement. So looking forward to this, not just being the first and only, but really to create a commitment to how we're gonna move forward as a city on the inside and outside, because I have learned, and I only won by 1 vote, y'all, so you know every vote matters, right? And so I have a lot to prove and a lot to learn, but I have to say is that growing and learning in public, we have been really intentional about bringing our community along, and everything that we learn, we share. And so this is one of those moments where we're gonna get to develop and co-design alongside you all. So really looking forward to that journey. And I also want to acknowledge that, you know, we have some of my colleagues from the council who have joined us as well. I think in regards, I know that Councilor Edwards is with us. Yes, I see you. I believe, and Councilor Campbell as well is with us. So I'm gonna give the floor back to, I wanted to give an opportunity to my colleagues to say hello, Tanisha, if that's okay before we begin.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna do it, I don't know how we do it. I'm gonna do it how we do it in the council, in order of arrival. I'm gonna go to Councilor Edwards to just say hello and a few remarks.
Thank you. I'll be very brief because I think a lot of these conversations are about listening and really understanding and growing and learning and how we create coalition. I'm just happy to be here today. I am excited to see, again, the inside outside, the politician, but also great leaders such as yourself, Tanisha, and the NAACP. Just having the two spearhead this conversation, I think is very important for folks not only to see, but to understand that's what it takes. It's a coalition of partnership and true understanding of stakeholders. People have been in the game for generations, longer than some of us been alive, right? But also people who have been crafting vision together from the grassroots. And that's why I'm very excited about this conversation. We too many of us, too many times, I'm guilty of it, you know, because of the work, we often silo ourselves because we're all dedicated so much to social justice that sometimes we end up in silos. But the reality is the only way to have a common vision, common goals, and honestly, to be able to do true work, we have to break down those silos, learn to listen, talk to each other, hear good, bad, and whatever, but also keep moving. And just want to acknowledge, I'm sure, I apologize if you already did this, the passing of a great giant, John Lewis. I don't know what to say besides talk about the person whose shoulders we stand on today, who's faced greater battles than we ever will, and just put in perspective what we're dealing with, what he had to deal with. So and be hope and be inspired by that. Mm-hmm. I'm more hopeful because I know I don't have to deal with what he did deal with because of his generation and the amazing people who came before me. So if in anything, no, we can accomplish so much more together because of his leadership, because of his sacrifice, because of what he was willing to deal with physically, the abuse, emotionally, mental. I mean, whenever I think I'm stressed out, I'm like, hold up. I'm not even in through what they went through, even the slightest bit. So I just want to acknowledge his loss and we be inspired by that.
Thank you.
That's all.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, Councilor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and thank you, Tanisha, for hosting this. Thank you guys for your hard work, particularly during a time where we're all sort of experiencing a collective trauma, right? But the intentionality to come together across sort of racial lines, the Black and brown that you always talk about, Councilor Mejia, right? We were talking about it even when you were just a District 4 resident before you were a councilor, the need to be intentional. And if I sound emotional, it's because, you know, I woke up early this morning to hear about the loss of John Lewis. And then of course, let's not forget Reverend Vivian, and two, you know, legends in the civil rights movement. And, you know, you think about what they would want from the next generation of leadership, what they would want from those they sort of strive to make sure could take their rightful place, right? Whether on the council, in certain industries. And so I'm sad, I'm mourning, but I'm also inspired, like Councilor Edwards said, to keep pressing forward and towards the mark, right? Which is ensuring that this city is equitable and racially just for everybody, right? That everyone has access to all the things that those men and women and others fought for us to have. You know, today we're talking about specific issues, but all issues matter, right? With respect to communities of color, who for far too long, particularly in the city of Boston, have struggled in terms of access, have struggled to get what they're entitled to and what they're due. And of course, have struggled for others to see the humanity in us. And so I am really, I think this conversation is timely. I think I am feeling a little bit overwhelmed emotionally today because of those losses. But as similar to what Councilor Edwards said, I think this is also a unique opportunity, right, to get things done. You know, the things we're pushing for on the council side, folks have been pushing for years, for decades. Some of the issues we're talking about, whether it's advocates, community organizations, residents on the ground who often are unnamed, this is a time for us to come together to give credit where credit's due, and to say this is not about any individual, it really is about transforming systems to show up equitably for everyone. And the way we do that is to work in partnership, to work collectively, and to hold folks accountable, right? And I am willing to do that work with community and partnership with community, to put aside ego. It's not about that, it's about getting things done. But most importantly, I'm here to listen. And I hope we create a space too where folks, if you're feeling emotional today, because it is an emotional day, we cannot deny that you share that, because we did, and we have lost two incredible legends in the movement. And if you're not feeling something, well, you know, go like this, right? You have to be feeling something. So it's important to share that our mental health, our spiritual health, our well-being is really important in this work. And so thank you both ladies for hosting this. I look forward to staying on and answering any questions or being helpful in any way I can during the conversation. But again, looking forward to working in partnership with all of you. And thank you, Councilor Mejia, to your team for being in contact with mine with respect to the event. Thank you, guys.
Great, wonderful. Thank you both, Councilors Edwards and Campbell, for being a part of the conversation today. One of the, as you've heard many times over now, this is really the continuation of a conversation that Julia and I have quite frequently. And so probably about a week ago, maybe, I was asked a question, and so I posed a question to folks, generally speaking, on Facebook. And I said, okay, so let's talk about what has the council, what has the city council done? And the response was, you know, from Julia, again, because we talk so much, we got on the phone and we started talking about really the work that the council has been engaged in. And my response to her was, but the people don't know. And so, yes, and it goes to what Councilor Edwards shared. It's like, we're so, even in the NAACP, right? I mean, we are so in the work. I mean, folks have no idea. I mean, there are some nights when literally I'm operating on like 2 hours of sleep because we've been up through the night working through issues or, you know, trying to move something, but the people don't know. And so it causes this disconnect that I think so many of us are seeing play out on social media in different ways, right? And so it's like we are so in the work that we're not on social media talking about the work, right? Or, you know, and so that conversation really kind of lit a fire to kind of bring us to today, to say, look, we have to be more intentional about not just informing community about what's going on, but making sure that community, that our neighbors are a part of the building of agenda, that truly residents across the city of Boston have the opportunity to pour into the work, help to inform the work, help to direct the work that, you know, that is being done, whether it's in the council or it's being done by an institutional organization like the NAACP. You know, I'm mindful, even though we are all volunteers in the NAACP, we're still a large volunteer organization. So there's some responsibility for us in this as well. So that's why we're here today. And so with that, I want to start the conversation. And again, folks can use the chat if you are in the meeting. For those who are watching online, we're going to try to manage the comments online as well to get you in here. Let's start the conversation around civic engagement and, you know, what can and should authentic civic engagement, community involvement look like, particularly during this time? I think, you know, as both Councilor Campbell and Edwards amplified, we did lose two giants yesterday. One of the legacies that I hold on to from both of them, Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian and Congressman Lewis, is that both of them were in community and stayed in community, and community fueled their work. And so every time they moved, they were moving with and for community. So there was no question. How do we get there? How do we stay there here in the city of Boston? Councilor Mejia?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I want to just quickly acknowledge that Councilor Asabi George is also following along via Facebook Live. She just sent me a little note. I just wanted to acknowledge that. And we also have comments coming in through our Facebook Live, so we'll bring you into the fold as well. But so when I think about community, this is how I started off my job, was in community, right? So the whole idea was, when we launched Determined Divas, was to ensure that community were working in collaboration with our elected officials to shape conversations, to inform thinking, you know. And I know, Councilor Campbell, you attended the Determined Divas dialogues. You know, we were really intentional about removing those barriers to engagement, because this is what these times require. Now, as a city councilor, what I've done is I've taken that same model and I've continued to work in that spirit of bringing people into the conversation, and creating as many platforms and opportunities for voice. So I think that the whole idea of centering it around the people who are living the realities and doing the work is crucial, because we can't continue to function in isolation. And I think, so that's one part of it. And then I think the other piece of it is not just bring people in to help inform the thinking and then go back into your little space and then forget about it. You know, I think that the community needs to be involved every step of the way of the sausage making, if you will, right? So just don't convene people for the sake of having a conversation, get those ideas and keep it moving. It's really about, how do you bring people along on that journey so that they can understand how politics play, so they can understand the differences, you know, every step of the way of policy making. Because I think that we have an opportunity to not just engage, but we also have to educate the public. I think there's a lot of us, and I'm one of them too. It's like, we oftentimes take for granted the spaces and the privilege that we have and access to people and opportunities that a lot of our people don't. And so we need to recognize that we have language. I mean, sometimes I'm still in rooms and I'm Googling things, right? So I'm serious, right? So I think we also, as counselors and elected officials, need to understand that we need to keep things as simple as possible so that all of our people can be engaged and have access to the information in ways that is culturally responsive and relevant to people. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that piece as well. And then the last piece I'll say in terms of civic and community engagement and what is so crucial is that we can't just invite people to come to a public hearing to tell their story. If we're not also beating down the door of like looking at our boards and our commissions and looking at different spaces in City Hall, then it's just a whole bunch of blah, blah, blah. Policy making is just one part of civics. There's also programming, there's also a professional development and building. There's like a lot more. It can't just be about policy. I think that for me in our office, we have been really intentional about creating multiple prongs of engagement. And through programming, you know, something as simple as an arts night where people can talk about the trauma that they're experiencing as it relates to the violence that's happening in their community. We're doing it in a way that's engaging, but we're creating that space, and it's a win-win because people can relieve their tension and come to terms with some of the trauma that they're facing, and we can build community so that we can address it and help inform our thinking about what are the things that we can bring back to the council around public health and mental health. You know, like it's that intentionality about like really utilizing different spaces to engage folks in ways that they haven't been engaged before.
So I wanna, let's stay there, but let's go deeper, okay? And I know Councilor Edwards has, you know, a similar background to yours in being, you know, a community activist before sitting in a city council seat. So all of that is yes, right? The question is, what's missing? What do we need to do differently? Right. So what do we need to do differently to get to the point where folks living in the city of Boston not only feel like they have a voice, they actually do have a voice in helping to guide and direct what is happening, you know, at the council level. Let's sit with the council. If you were to take off your council hat, and that's, you know, again, Councilor Edwards would love to get you in here on this too, going back to when you all were on the pavement, right? What's missing? What should we be doing differently? What could this structure look like based on your experiences both outside and now inside?
Do you want Lydia to Councilor Edwards? Why don't you take that one? And then, yeah.
So agreed that there's definitely room for improvement, right? So we've inherited as city councilors a means of moving and how to move and how to quote unquote engage people. We inherited that system of the hearings, of the working sessions, of the so on and so forth and so on and so forth. But we also need to recognize every single one of us as city councilors who are certainly on this talk right now, as well as the new class of folks who just came in. We inherited one thing, but all of us ran on change. All of us ran on doing things differently. Mm-hmm. And so part of it is our work within the city council as city councilors to reimagine how we engage differently for folks, right? Because if our system is not as engaging, it is not as welcoming as many people say it is. One, because it's oftentimes overwhelmingly in English. Two, because a lot of the hearings were happening downtown at the city council in our house instead of your house. There were a lot of different things in which we were changing and having to have that practical conversation too, because when we move out of the city hall, we take a lot of people who are working downtown as well. We change their commutes and their ability to get home to their families. So a lot of people don't understand that too. Like we have a whole, like a whole stage management, whole people who come behind that. And while, I am happy to stay till 10 o'clock at night. Someone's got to get paid to be there till 10 o'clock at night, and that's less time with his newborn, right? So there's practical realities we have as well about how we engage as the council, some inherited and some that needs to change. And then there's just where we come from, grassroots organizing, how we engaged in general, right? So I did everything from stand outside people's houses saying, I think you should pay my worker. She's a nanny, and I think you should. And I think all your neighbors should know with the sign with your name in bold about how you don't pay her. So that's one form of engagement. And I think it has its place. It has its place. But the question for us is, how do we amplify and also change how we move? And so here's some suggestions. And this is where I think the back and forth is really going to be very helpful. One thing we did to domestic workers is we took it home to church. So one thing we did was Sundays was a very precious day because we believe we met people where they were. I would go to church 4 times on Sunday. So I'm going to heaven. I just want to let you know, I'm going to heaven. I would go to the Spanish speaking church, then I go to the Portuguese speaking church, and those are the languages I could speak, because we were trying to meet domestic workers and finding them where they were. Then I would go to the UU church and the First churches and find a lot of their white employers. So remembering where the civil rights movement came from, and also remembering to meet people where they are, and that means church. So I'm not trying to be controversial with folks. It's a practical reality. It's a concentration of people in one location. And we need to be in fellowship with a lot of religious leaders, because that's, I wouldn't say easy picking, but that's when people's hearts, minds, and thoughts are probably the most open. So physically, Councilor Edwards, need to get to, I can say this, I have been guilty of this. I am Catholic. That's who a majority of the folks I know who are Catholic leadership but there are a lot more than Catholic, even in my district. I need to be in fellowship with the imam. I need to be in fellowship with the rabbi. I need to be in fellowship with more folks. And I can say that's something for me. That's one suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because just physically being there in the church changes how people see you, how approachable you are, right? If they're like, oh, I should be here on Sunday, it just changes everything. So that's one thing in fellowship, bringing it back to the church and meeting people where they are. The other thing and this, I don't even think it's controversial, but I do think it's important for us to, it's annoying, it's old school. And this is, again, the hardest part, but sometimes it's literally just picking up the phone and having, like you and Julia did, you have that one-on-one, right? But here's where it's hard for me sometimes as a counselor. I don't want to create more silos by having a clique that I only call. So this is where I need community to say to folks, or to even me, please call X person, please call Y person, or can we zoom this out? I love the small conversations, the small things. I love coming to people's homes and eating, because I can't cook. But and I love coming to people's homes, period. And it was in those intimate conversations you will find the fellowship. Even when I'm coming there and we're about to disagree, this is a good example. I'm, as you know, very much for workers' rights, especially for nannies, house cleaners, and au pairs. I believe that they are workers. There was about 10 mothers in Charlestown who were like, we could not disagree with you more. We're angry that you support them, and I think they thought it was going to be an ambush. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, sister, let's go. Let's go. And we sat down for 3 hours, 10 people and me were talking about this particular issue. That to me was the greatest thing. They came in really disagreeing with me. We walked out with a plan of action for how we move forward, an understanding of where we're just not going to agree, and how we move. And that was the best thing. And I love those things. So two things that I need to commit to more of, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about, is taking it back to church, all churches.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody goes to church, but a lot of people do, and a lot of people need it to go to church. That's where they go. And then also taking it home, literally to home. So those are 2 things I can commit, and those are 2 ideas I have.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, even from a historical perspective, as you mentioned, I mean, the relationship between kind of the community and the church has historically been strong. It still is strong, even if it's for different reasons. it still is strong. So I agree with you. I would also, and again, want to make sure that, and I know folks are watching on Facebook for comments as well.
Tanisha, before we move on to, I just wanted to say one thing, and then I wanted to ask Councilor Campbell something very specific about some of the things that I know that she's been working on in her office in regards to civic engagement. But I wanted to say that church, I'm a spiritual being, and I just started, I struggled with going to church during my campaign because everybody said, if you want votes, you got to go to the church. And I'm like, nah, I'm not transactional. I can't be up in these spaces just because I want people to vote for me. And it took me a long time to walk in through those spaces. And when I did, I would go in and quietly, nobody even knew that I was running for office. And I would sit in tears because I knew that that was the space where people were bringing in all that they were carrying. And it just didn't feel right in my soul. And I made a commitment that after the election that I will continue to go, because that's a big mistake that elected officials make, that they only come in when they're running. So it's about building community in churches and working with people collectively. But the other place where we need to find people, which is where I went, was to the hair salons, the barbershops, the bodegas. I was, breaking up barbecues and baby showers, because we have to think, like, if you're really serious about the engagement piece, like Councilor Edwards talked about, is meeting people where they're at. It's also finding people in non-traditional spaces, even at nightclubs. I'm telling you, you could talk to people about civic engagement in the women's bathroom. Like, it's really being serious about, like, every interaction that you have with people, it's about engaging them in the process. But I know one of the things that Councilor Campbell's office has been doing is engaging the civic associations and building their capacity. So I'm going to ask Councilor Campbell, and then I think it's really important for us to hear from the people, because we've been on this for a while, and all they've heard about is from us. And as much as I love my colleagues, this is not about us. This is about listening. So if you don't mind, I'm going to put y'all on mute after that, and then I want to hear from the people. Is that cool?
No, thank you, Tanisha, and thank you, Councilor Mejia. And one of the things that Tanisha said that I think is critically important, has resonated with me, is, I'm a lawyer by training, like many of you, right? Tanisha, Councilor Edwards. And in that training, you put your head down and you get the work done. And every minute, right, is time wasted. And I think as an elected, I really continue to have to learn how to raise my head up so people know what, not just me, my team, right? I have an incredible staff. Many of them are quite young. And then Cheryl's on the call, and she's our elder. She's my senior advisor. So hired someone to specifically focus on seniors, but my team works really hard too. So I think engagement, hiring is important, whether it's youth focused, senior focused. So what do our teams look like? Something that Councilor Mejia mentioned is in pulling in our civic associations. So there are between 45 and 50 civic associations, so volunteer resident-led civic associations in my district, which is largely Dorchester and Mattapan, a little bit of JP and Rosendale. And these folks have been at it for years. Some are newly formed, some have been around for decades. And what we found, because we engage them quite a bit, we engage them in a campaign, and we still go to their meetings, we still email, we're in contact with them constantly to inform what we're doing in our office. And what we found is they weren't being invested in, right? They weren't being supported. And so went outside of the city council to raise money. And I had to fundraise for this to create our civic empowerment series. It took place over the course of 6 months, and every month they would meet on the weekends. And our civic leaders would be sharing best practices with each other, working collectively, not in silos. So Ashmont Hill was working with the other side of Washington Street, across neighborhood and sometimes racial divides. And so we would bring them together for professional development training. We gave them materials, free food, everything was free. And so they could build partnership. And we continue that work. And actually my civic leaders are like, can we do this again? But what came out of that, and what often doesn't get the attention of the media really, is these group of folks who are mainly Black and brown and who are women, doing the work on the ground to inform what we do at government levels. This became the initiative, or the catalyst for us to do our civic summit, which we did in November of last year with the JFK Library and EMK Institute, again, had to fundraise for that. But it came out of this Mattapan, Dorchester work. And we had almost 400 civic leaders from across the city of Boston come to this summit and say, not only do we want to share best practices and grow together and do workshops, but workshops really around equity, what does it mean, racism, all of that. But to say in Boston, if we're going to move the needle forward in the work, we have to come across neighborhood lines. And I think for me as a district councilor, it can be hard in that I'm not citywide, so I really have to be really intentional in my district, but we know the issues we're talking about in District 4, education, housing, public safety, et cetera, have to connect the other neighborhoods. So our civic leaders are doing that. But I think as a city, we have to invest in them, give them the resources, give them the human capital, the training, whatever they ask for, we gave and we continue to do that. And I'll say one small piece that connects to that specifically on public safety is we created what we call Constructing Peaceful Communities, which was a separate space where residents and resident leaders met along with many others. We hosted a meeting at the Teen Center in Mattapan and other places where folks came together to specifically talk about public safety and what we could do in response to some really tragic incidents of violence, what we could do as a community. We had police officers, activists, youth, you name it. But again, District 4 focused, but a lot of it informing what we do in the public safety space. Again, another group of stakeholders that came together, and it continues to be incredible. So I think, again, work we've been doing that we want to continue to expand, but what might it mean for the city to have greater investment in that versus us as counselors, having to go out and fundraise and hire someone to do these professional trainings, which sometimes can happen for free, but sometimes it can't. You still need resources. So would love to continue that conversation in partnership with you guys, or you ladies, as well as residents, of course, too.
That I actually want to lift up as a perfect segue, because as you were talking, Councilor Campbell, I was just observing. I want to pause and acknowledge the leadership of Black women, my sisters, and really just appreciate certainly the three of you being here this morning and sharing just what you're working on, how you're working, and who you're working for. Growing up, my elected official, just the person I looked to for all things in politics was Senator Diane Wilkerson. Because at the time, right, she was it. She shattered all sorts of barriers. She was knocking down doors. She was shaking tables all over the place. And I was like, yes. And what I want to share is that, for those who don't know, she, state senator here in Boston, 2nd Suffolk. But she was the only Black woman in the Senate. And so for me, when I was growing up in Brockton, it didn't matter that she was the Boston state senator. She was a Black woman in leadership at the State House. She was my state senator. And when you talk to her, what you learn is that she took that on. She was all of our state senator because she was the only one. And so I think, and I share that to say that I do think it's important for folks to remember that, one, we are growing in representation in these elected roles. And two, that some of you have specific communities that you're responsible for. And I think sometimes that can get lost, right? So as you're talking, Councilor Campbell, I'm hearing you talk about District 4 and all the work that you're doing there. And because that's the constituency you were elected to serve. And, same with Councilor Edwards. And, and so I do think sometimes for us as Black folk, when we see you, we're like, but you're Black. So we need you on everything Black, no matter where it is, okay? you know? And so I do think there's a piece of this where, you know, it's important for us to know what you're doing so we can support it, right? But at the same time, figuring out how we, how and when we pull you in and make sure that on the larger issues that are so pressing for all of us, regardless of where we're living, how that engagement is happening and how it's happening in an authentic way. And also to make sure that people know that we want you on these issues. So, you know, so this isn't a territorial thing, like we want and need you on these issues. And so how can community play a role in making sure that you're called to the table as well? So with that, I know, do we have questions from our off Facebook or any comments there?
Anyone from Zoom or anybody from,
Thank you.
or anybody in Zoom,
Or
you know,
questions?
or our chat. I know sometimes y'all be chatting privately here. Let me see, Michelle, thing I don't read something that was just intended for me by mistake.
Yeah, and I love this idea around, right, where we do the community meetings, you know, using the libraries as well. You know, it makes me wonder, you know, are there ways to you know, in some way to disrupt the structure that currently exists? And, you know, I don't know, but are there ways to have more informal, you know, kind of citywide or subject matter based conversations that aren't a hearing? You know, people just want to learn. And, you know, you all, because you do have teams that are studying specific issues, have a whole lot of knowledge and information. Is that possible? I saw you, Councilor Edwards.
Yeah, and again, I'm happy if there's a question that comes in, but to be put on mute, I will just understand at some point. So I am, you know, but I want to say, I really appreciate your comment about how community sees who their representatives are across district lines, period, right? I mean, Councilor Mejia told me that, you know, she has some Dominicans in Lawrence who are like, what's up? you know, like they see who their representatives are, but they don't across community lines. And that's a good thing. And that's also a different thing, right? And I won't say it's a bad thing, because I would be the same way if there's only one, and we don't have any Black women, by the way, in the Senate, right? So whoever she will be one day, will be, whether she intends to or not, beyond her district lines.
That's right.
Right. So I definitely understood that, because I mean, for many of us, we were women, we were Black before we had lines that defined our jobs.
Right.
Okay. And my district is different. My district is different. So what does that mean for me in terms of balancing, and when folks, all folks, for whatever reason they want to align with me? It could be because of the organizing indigenous Brazilian community, right? It could be because, I was the one who helped them as a lawyer years ago, and they don't really care who their state rep is. They're like, you speak Portuguese and you helped me get my money, so you are mine. So however people want to claim me, first of all, I consider it an honor to be claimed and to be loved. And to remind myself of that. It is not extra work, it is extra love. You're me, you're mine. So that's one thing I have to put my headspace in that. The other thing though is, as you are loving and claiming me, please know it's harder for me to respond when you claim me in crisis. Like, respond tomorrow, respond tomorrow, respond tomorrow, respond. Sometimes it's very hard for me, because I have a direct, you know, as Andrea, Julie, all of us have a to-do list that will never end, right? Of things that are direct in district as well. So I hope that you claim me, but claim me not only in crisis, claim me in times of calmness, claim me in times of pain, claim me in times of joy, so that when my phone rings or when I see the email from you, even if you're from Springfield, right? I understand this person is an expression of love and claiming and saying, you know, we need you, Councilor. That helps me. It is harder if the only time you want to claim me is when you're you're angry at me.
Mhm.
It's still love,
Mhm.
but it's much harder because sometimes people are like, I just don't like anything about you. I don't like your face. I don't like whatever. But I know that this person is writing me because she's probably is African, not probably is African American, and she disagrees with a moment or a time or a vote that I took. And so she's claiming and connecting because you're one of us, but I'm angry at you. And that's the only time I've ever heard from her. I mean, I'm talking people saying, I've insulted my ancestors and Harriet Tubman and everything like that. They're claiming me and they're reaching to me because of, who I am, and they're angry with me.
Mhm.
But I don't know how to respond to that. And I don't know how to rectify that if you claim me one time in anger. So claim, I see that for the honor and love,
Mhm.
but I need you keep coming. That's all.
Yeah. Could I just say something real quick? I'm at large, so I feel for me, it's been a very interesting journey, but especially because I ran unapologetically about uplifting Black and Brown people, period. And the spaces that we won in were Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, Hyde Park, and East Boston. So I knew exactly who put me in office, right? And so as an at-large councilor, I've been really, really super mindful of making sure that the communities that put me in office have a seat at every single table that we create and inform our thinking, continue to be engaged. But one of the things that I'm also learning in my role as a city councilor is that I am at large, and there are other folks and there's 700,000 constituents. So one of the things that I've been trying to learn and do is how do we bring the city across our differences together and identify things that no matter what, if you live in Charlestown or if you live in East Boston or South Boston or, South Bay, is that, everywhere in between, there are certain pockets of issues that impact you regardless of what your race is, of your socioeconomic status. And what I've been trying, the fireworks is a great example. Like, no matter where you live, everybody's mad about that. That was one thing that I felt like in our office, that we can convene people across our differences. And with that issue, there were some people who said, lock them up. And there were some people, nah, we don't need that. So I was able to bring people from across, not just socioeconomic status and racial differences, but also philosophies of what it was, how can we deal with this situation in a community-centered approach. And it was really, for us, everything that I feel like our office is a learning lab. We're always learning and trying to figure out how can we create blueprints for engagement. And so the fireworks presented itself as an opportunity to do just that. And, as part of our journey, the civic engagement is recognizing that everybody needs to feel included and also accountable to what is happening to the larger community. And that includes bringing white people into the conversation and holding them and calling them in and creating space for them to also recognize the role that they play in addressing some of the issues of racial disparities in the city of Boston. And I think that's one of the things that I've been able to do.
Councilor Mejia, now that you mention it, I noticed that the fireworks have calmed down a bit. What did y'all do?
Oh, I'm gonna be honest. I can't take credit for all that, y'all, because the 4th of July already went and came, and so no. But I think that Ron Odom, his testimonial during our town hall, we created a little PSA around that, and we really talked about the trauma and the trigger of people who have lost loved ones to gun violence. We were able to really uplift the realities that people out in these streets were getting confused, and they weren't sure if it was a shotgun, if it was, fireworks. And just, we were able to really kind of uplift that. And then the task force was created. And now, James Hills was really driving a lot of the conversation in the community. That wasn't also an inside-outside strategy. Marissa, who's a Roxbury resident, was really engaged in the conversation. What we were able to do is really bring community to the conversation, and everybody put their little grain of salt to address this issue, and I think it was that convening, and then just people being so intentional about having a different conversation. And even in that space, Tanisha, we were talking about policing. We were talking about who is responding to these issues and who is not responding to them, right? We were able to really drive home the point that what was happening around this country, around anti-Blackness and around police brutality, could not be as a result of what was going on with these fireworks, and we couldn't give people a pass. Like we seized that moment to continue the dialogue around what was happening on the national platform as well.
So perfect segue for you and Councilor Campbell to talk about what you're doing in that space.
Yeah. So I know from our office, we created a little PowerPoint, a little situation. I can tell you about a little, we from our council office, and then I'd love Councilor Campbell, because you've been at this far longer than I have. We come to our work always from a community-centered approach. And so if Jacob or Brady can just throw up one slide, I'll talk about some of the hearing orders that we filed in collaboration with the NAACP and other civic leaders who are working in the space. So after, there were some things that were already in the works, and then some things that resulted as what was going on the national landscape. And just so everybody knows that in city government, this is something that I also had to learn, is that I thought I was gonna go in there and change everything, but there's a process in city government. You have to go through a hearing, you have to do working sessions, you have to file ordinances, and everything is, everything's a learning process. And so one of the things, here's several hearing orders that we have filed. One was a hearing order addressing the non-lethal force restraint tactics. We did this with Councilor Campbell, and also with your support, Tanisha. You helped inform what that hearing order was going to look like. We also filed a hearing order with Councilor Kim Janey and Councilor Campbell on restorative justice practices in the role of police in our schools. And then we also, and this one came to be because my sister in service, Tanisha Sullivan, asked us, what are we doing about campus police? We're talking about, the Boston Police Department, we're talking about police in our schools, but what are we doing around the university and campus police in general? And so we really took that feedback and created a hearing order to discuss that issue. So a hearing order basically is an opportunity to bring people across different departments and the city and constituents together, the people who are living the realities and doing the work, to inform our thinking about, here's the issue at play and what can we do about it. And then the next thing that happens is that we move it into a working session, and then based on what we hear there, then we can create and craft an ordinance to pass a law. And then these are the two ordinances that we have filed. One is the Nonviolent Emergency Response Unit that we did in collaboration with Councilor Wu and Lydia and Councilor Edwards. And then the Civilian Review Board with Councilor Arroyo and Councilor Campbell. I would love for Councilor Edwards to talk about the Nonviolent Emergency Response Unit, just to kind of share the space and have her talk a little bit about that ordinance. And because she's also the head of governmental ops, and this is the first time that we have one of our own in this position of power, and governmental ops could
What does one of our own mean?
The first person,
A Black woman.
a Black woman, right?
That. Black woman.
Right. So that we have a Black woman who's leading governmental ops, which means that a lot of the things that we have been out here hooting and hollering about, we have a potential to really move the work forward in ways that we haven't been before. This is the first time in the city that we've had women of color leading the council. And so we have an opportunity and a responsibility to move with that sense of urgency to move the work forward. So I'm gonna ask Lydia to talk a little bit about the governmental ops
So as you do that, Councilor Edwards, because I think this is a perfect learning opportunity too. Can you talk a little bit about what government ops is? Like what is your role within the council? And how does that, as we talked about kind of the systems that you all walked into on the council, how does your role either support those systems, or how is your role being used to disrupt some of those systems?
Thank you. Yeah, so government ops, it's not a sexy title, but I love it. It is one of the most powerful committees we have. One of them, we have many powerful committees, but it's where you can kill an ordinance or you can create an ordinance. Because all laws, we can have hearing orders in every single one of our committees. But when you come to writing the law, it has to come through government ops, the final product. And so whether that law is the ordinance to ban facial recognition, which is what we did, or whether that is a home rule petition to create the fire academy, which Councilor Campbell worked on for years, whatever it is, the last stop in city council is my committee. And in that committee, where we have the hearing, where we go through down to the comma and the working sessions, and we're fighting and negotiating amongst ourselves and also with the administration. Right? And my job is to make sure my colleagues' visions for disruption or whatever they want to do is legally sound. That is my job, is to make sure whatever Councilor Mejia brings forward, I can look at the city council ordinances, I can look at the Massachusetts Constitution, I can look at existing laws and say, this fits. Not whether I agree with it or disagree with it, but this fits. And this is how it fits. And then there's the politicking, which we must do publicly, unlike the State House. Sorry, not to dig my brothers and sisters over there, but ours are open, and that's what the working session is. It seems like it's tiresome, but the working sessions is when we are showing you how we work, how we analyze, what we agree with, what we disagree with. And we, unlike the State House, we do that publicly. You don't see the horse trading and stuff like that at the State House. You see it straight out from us. And then the other part is with the administration, who's also at the table there. The final product then I must sell to my colleagues and explain why I agree that we should move this forward. And that's when I bring it to the floor is when it can be voted on. So
that's the role of government. So government ops is the body that brings the law to the council to be voted on.
The gatekeeper or the gate breaker, whatever you want to call the job. But when it comes to the ordinances, which is our function, that's me, my committee. So, when we're talking about one of the ordinances that we filed, Councilor Mejia talked about the the alternative to 911, which is essentially, we need to acknowledge that not every single incident needs a 911 call and police response. They do need a neutral response, a de-escalated response, a professional response, but they don't necessarily need it to be armed and in a police uniform. And the police agree with that too. The police agree with that too. And we're not talking about removing police, we're actually talking about saving them for the actual criminal, investigative, and other authorities where their uniform, where they're being armed is vital. We're talking with the grandparents with dementia. We're talking folks with mental health issues. Family members overwhelmingly want, and this is, I think it was Ms. Coleman actually, Ms. Coleman.
Yep,
She called, her son was having a mental health breakdown.
Yeah.
And there was only one option for her to call, and that was 911. The police came and responded to that. Hope Coleman, thank you, Christine, thank you, thank you, thank you. I will say her name, Hope Coleman. She called the police. I have not read the police reports, but I will say her son is dead today. And how they responded, didn't respond appropriately is not the debate I'm trying to have. The fact that there was nobody else for her to call is the problem. There was no other person for her to call. And the fact that some people may not call because they're scared about how the police may respond or how the back and forth will go. So we believe there can be a third public safety or fourth public safety arm. And it is about safety. And it is about a government response of professionals to help deal with those moments. And it's bipartisan support. It is bipartisan support. Republicans, Democrats, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to addiction, when it comes to family, we're not talking about domestic violence. Again, this is for nonviolent response, okay? I have family members who are paranoid schizophrenics, who are not dangerous, but need to be calmed down by a professional. And that is what we are looking at, separate from the police, but part of the public safety family. And we want to build it with police, with the community, with social workers, with the best team, those people who have to respond to that anyway. And also, here's the other thing, police need to come in, come out, and move on. We expect this response to be long-term. You come in, you understand, I'll just use myself, I had a moment, I may have been off my meds, I have been calmed down, and you will continue to work with me. And I don't expect the police officers to do that. I don't want them to necessarily. They got other stuff on their plate. But I would expect what we create is long-term check-in and really are helping folks with mental health, really helping families cope with that. And if I called again, they know who I am. They know it's Lydia. They know my heart. They know I'm not dangerous, but they know I need some help. And that's where I'll stop there, because the vision isn't complete until community responds with what they really feel is necessary.
Great, thank you. And Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Tanisha. I'll speak to just a few of the issues, but before that, I think what you're getting at is really important in terms of what Councilor Mejia and Councilor Edwards were talking about, just the process, right? Whether on paper or the unwritten rules in the system that we inherited, some of it supports moving things forward, some of it doesn't, right? And so there are legitimate barriers that make it hard for us to really push forward really good ideas and to get it done. And so on the one hand, we have this hearing process. So for a long time, before you could introduce an ordinance or a law that would go to Councilor Edwards' committee, you were expected to have conversations, of course, with community and your colleagues through these hearings to develop ideas, to have the robust conversation so that when you drafted an ordinance on an issue, people wouldn't be shocked, right? They would say, oh, I understand why this is in, why this is out. And the goal was then, by having all of those hearings and conversations, you could then have an ordinance that you knew would make it through. But we have to do this not only in partnership with our colleagues, we have to do it in partnership with the administration and the mayor and our departments. And let me tell you, for some of the issues, particularly around policing reform, sometimes in the education space, some of the issues that are more complex, that involve race is explicitly, and where you have to talk about race and racism, sometimes having those hearing orders be honored has been a battle in the system. And so I have been talking about quite a bit, whether it is body cameras, for example, right? An issue, Shagan, BP-CAT, and so many others, including my predecessor, Councilor Yancey, and Congresswoman Presley, and Councilor Jackson, and many others were pushing. There were a lot of hearing orders that weren't honored. And then when I got to the council, there was an agreement that a pilot program would actually happen. And to try to get that off the ground, I was like, I thought this was agreed to, right? Can't we just get this done? It was a battle. I mean, we had to push to have hearing orders. I then had to push my way into BPD. So I was, at BPD trying to have these conversations. We had to end up, as committee chair, I ended up going to court to fight the unions to get this done, because one of the unions sued the city with respect to the policy. So there's so much there, so many layers that the community doesn't see that make it really difficult to get something done. And can really change the timeline, which for us councilors who get it, we're like, we should be able to get this done in a couple of weeks, right? Have a hearing order, get your ordinance, working session, boom, get it done. But sometimes it can take years because of the pushback. And even on some of the hearing orders with respect to Civilian Review Board and trying to get the co-op, which currently exists, that serves as this accountability measure, to have just a conversation on that. Had to have conversations with unions. They're like, what are you trying to do there? Civilian what? And it's like, it's not an ordinance yet, it's a conversation. And we could not get that before the body, right? It was a struggle. So I think this is a great opportunity for us going forward to really think about how we as counselors, and I'll speak for myself, can pull apart that process to really share at moments when it's so hard and how we pull in support to get it done. I will tell you the reason a lot of these policing reforms are now getting media attention, because they didn't get it before, right, is because of what's happening nationally and because of the new makeup of the council and because the residents are mobilizing in the thousands. You can't ignore that now. So suddenly, if you want to ignore a hearing order, it's like, good luck. If you want to ignore a conversation, you can't do that. So I do think this is an opportune time. And I've been saying, if not now, then when will we push for qualified immunity, civilian review board, the nonviolent emergency response system, diversity in our police department, all these issues have been talked about for years. This is the time to do it. But there are really hard barriers that I think folks need to understand that make this job really challenging. And I'll add, I was talking to Councilor Edwards just this morning. When you are taking on pushing for reforms with the policing system, and I've been talking to a lot of police, don't kid yourself, it's scary at moments. It can be very scary when you are taking on, and I think everyone would say this across the country, folks, activists, organizations, when you are taking on, or at least the framing is you're taking on the police. And we're like, no, we're trying to transform our system to create greater community safety in our community, but invest in initiatives that come from community, to create community, to build community so that they can protect themselves, so that we have everything we need to create safety in our own communities, and they need resources to do that. But when you frame it as us versus them, which some are trying to do, Black counselors against the police or anti-police or that, it gets dangerous at moments. So this advocacy, coupled with the barriers of the system, coupled with real concerns around pushing the hard stuff, it's hard. And so I look forward to working in partnership with everyone on that. But on the specifics, you know, I got to the council, I chair the Committee on Public Safety. We included criminal justice because of just my personal past and the loss of many folks to the criminal justice system, right, including my brother. But pushing the envelope to talk about conditions of confinement. You know, folks are often saying, well, the city of Boston doesn't oversee the prisons and houses of correction. I'm like, that's true, but we get all the people. Majority of folks, men and women, increasingly more women who are coming out of our prisons and houses of correction are coming to the city of Boston. We need to be talking about re-entry, getting them the resources they need for housing, jobs, mental health support, so they can get a second, third, or maybe even a fourth chance. We need to talk about the conditions of confinement. So did a lot of work on solitary confinement, really pulling back the layers of what does it mean to incarcerate people? And when those folks come out after being incarcerated in such a way, how hard it is to readjust, to come back to society, and we want them to be successful. So you really have to understand those conditions in order to have an effective reentry response. Focused a lot on diversity or lack thereof in our police department, and the fact that it's predominantly white and male, not just at entry level, but also promotional levels. And to your point, Tanisha, you were asking us earlier around how do we have conversations that aren't just through formal hearing orders. Informal conversations informed the report I put out 2.5 years ago that had specific steps as to how we could push the department in the city to create more diversity in our police departments. And it had to do with, we got to look at civil service. Politically, people don't want to go through that. They don't want to talk about it. People want to frame veterans against people of color. I was in some battles with some veterans who were just like attacking me. But because of some of these informal conversations and hearings, was able to build with a lot of veterans who now stand with me and say, you're right, we have to do more and we might have to look at civil service. That took a year, right, to be able to get to that space. In addition to creating informal spaces to talk about diversity, looking at the hair test, which we just finally got rid of. We were talking about that along with the NAACP, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, ACLU, for years around that barrier. Finally got that done, but the council had been talking about it for a really long time. Promotional exam, the disparate impact there, and how we want to challenge those cases. We just talked about Coleman, the Coleman family. We are challenging that, right? So there are a lot of ways in which the council is pushing advocacy that people may not see, but that ultimately could get done, but we need the partnership of the mayor and the administration to also get some of this done. And so diversity in public safety agencies, not just police, but the fire department as well, EMS, critically important. We've been doing a lot there. Civilian Review Board, I've been talking to Jamal Crawford. This has been a major issue of his, but frankly, this issue goes back, I think, to the 80s. I was talking to Councilor Liz Braden about this. We have a new council, so people are more supportive. She was talking to a constituent who literally said, we've been talking about that Civilian Review Board since the 1980s. Why has it not happened? And so a lot of it is the unions. A lot of it is just folks who don't see the value. Sometimes it was council colleagues that don't see the value. But again, now we have an opportunity, even though some hearing orders were ignored, to put forth this ordinance, given the new time and collective energy to get it done. And of course, with Councilor Edwards' support as the chair of the committee. And in addition, things that we don't talk about that connect to public safety is, I was talking about constructing peaceful communities. This space I've created in my district, it's not citywide, but it's in my district. Some creative community ideas to deal with public safety, vacant lots. We call it our vacant lot initiative. The majority of vacant lots that are city owned are in my district. So all the inequities, including vacant lots. And we've been working with Wentworth Institute and so many others to try to activate these city-owned spaces, not only for housing, maybe wealth building opportunities, businesses, you name it, and saying, city, if you don't have a plan, community does. Let's just give them this land. Let's get the resources to get it done. And we've had some traction there. But this is also an initiative that directly supports public safety work. We know that a lot of the incidents of violence are connected to problem properties or vacant lots. This is a major initiative that doesn't get attention because people don't want to talk about vacant lots, but we've been working on that because it comes from community. In addition, we know investing in our young people. My very first budget ask as a city councilor after a couple of hearings was creating a fund for youth serving organizations. We call it now the Youth Development Fund. You would never know that Councilor Campbell and her office were involved in that. But literally, we pushed for this fund to be created because we said a lot of the organizations that serve our young people can't get funding from the city of Boston. That's ridiculous. And so push for us to set that up. We asked for $1 million. We got 250,000, but now we keep pushing and getting more money. But another initiative, and clearly I've talked way too long, but there are a lot of great things. We can continue this conversation, but I do think there are barriers along the way that we have to be able to speak to. There are painful moments along the way too, that we as counselors have to bear and trying to move some really tough issues forward. But again, looking forward to this collective action, and given the time period we're in, if not now, then when. So thank you guys for letting me go on too long. I'm listening.
Yeah, that's it. I must put, could you mute Councilor Campbell? That's it. That, you know what?
I'm muted. I'm done. But thank you, ladies.
It's all good. And I think important information. I mean, for me, anytime we have these conversations in community, part of it is to inform in terms of like what's going on. But I also think it's important for us to pause when there are opportunities to educate so that we can all be on the same page. And the piece around that came from both Councilor Edwards and Councilor Campbell with respect to process and like how government works is so important. We have to remember, it can be hard to remember because with a council that is now as diverse as the Boston City Council, we have to remember we haven't been here that long. We haven't been on the council that long. Congresswoman Presley was elected to the council in 2010. Mm-hmm. Okay, we haven't been there that long. Okay, and so there's still so much that we have to learn that we're, both, you all as counselors are still learning because there are seats that you've never sat in before that you are sitting in for the first time. And then as a community, the reality is that as Black and Brown folk and AAPI folk in this city, we are in spaces that we have never been in before. And so there's learning that's happening, every day. And so the way that things have been done before, the way things were done before was aligned with how other folks did things and what worked for them. And so we are in a new day. And so, you know, I do think and appreciate again kind of what was shared with respect to process, that we all know how this thing works, so that we can figure out what works for us as a whole, and what might need to change. That being said, I want to, in our final time, you know, let's have an open conversation about race. And specifically, I want to talk a little bit about race within the Black community and race within the Latinx community. One of the things that, you know, I love talking with Councilor Mejia, because we get to have these open conversations about, you know, here are the questions that we have about race, and just to kind of put it on the table for an opportunity to learn, so that we can help move us all together. And so I would love, one of the things I shared with Councilor Mejia is that it's been so interesting to me as we are, you know, now in this moment where, you know, after George Floyd's murder, you know, so many people, I mean, we've all experienced it. It's like America is waking up, and, you know, people are like, this is what y'all have been talking about? Like, this is a real thing. Like, you know, and they're serious and they mean it, because, you know, they've never had to see it before. And so what's happening is that, yes, white America is waking up, but there are also people within our own communities that are waking up in a different way. And, you know, and coming to understand that the experience of Black people, we say all the time, Black folks are not a monolith. Even within the Black community, we're realizing Black folks are not a monolith. You know, what your experience has been, where your people, you know, are from, and, you know, all of that impacts how you see these issues of race. And likewise within the Latinx community. I shared with Councilor Mejia that I have, for the first time within the last 4 to 6 weeks, I've heard, you know, some of my colleagues in the Latinx community start to talk about race, you know, and identify and you know, either identify as being Black or identify as being white. And that's been an interesting dynamic. And I'd love to just talk a little bit about that, because I think it's important for us to, again, as we are in this racial justice movement, to have deeper understanding about how the diversity of our communities can help to move forward this conversation on racial justice, or if we're not careful, how it can be used to drive a wedge in our communities. So do you want to talk, I love the point you shared with me about the census.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
respect to race in the Latinx community.
Yeah. So like Tanisha said, this is one of our favorite topics. We've been talking about it for the last 6 years. And I think that for me, as someone who identifies and claims my Black roots in my community, it is very uncomfortable for a lot of folks in the Latinx community, because there is this anti-Black and colorism situation happening across the globe. That is passed down, right? And so I always say that the only difference between us is the port that we were dropped off on, right? When they abducted our ancestors. But a lot of Latinos have a hard time coming to terms with that fact, because it's just sad. And I'm being nice about it. But one of the things that happened in 2010 was when the census, I think, was the first time that they actually had the race, to select a race, that even if you were Latino, you had to pick a race, whether you were Black or you were white. And I was doing the census with my mom, helping her fill it out. And I had to educate her about her own Blackness. Because in her mind, she was like, I'm Indian, because look at my hair, you know, she has that Taino situation. I'm like, no, that's not an option. You are Black. And she said, no, you're Black because look at your hair. My mom says a little bit straighter than mine. I had to have that real talk with my own mother about her lack of really embracing her Blackness. And then we had to talk about how whenever I visit the Dominican Republic, how there's just so much anti-Blackness there. And, you know, that was 10 years ago that I had that conversation with my mom, but that's not the first time I had conversations about Blackness I mean, even in high school. You know, the high school that I went to, Dorchester High, was all Black and Latino. And I hung out with all my Black family, and everybody was like, the Latinos were upset at me that why are you not hanging with us? And I'm like, I'm here to hang with everybody, you know, like, but they were really, even then in the 80s, were forcing me to choose a side. And one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have this conversation is because if we're not grounding the work on Blackness, right? If we're not grounding the work on what is happening in the Black community, then what we're doing is watering it down. And I think right now, in this moment in time, the Latinx community needs to recognize that, you know, if we're not about it, then we are for it, you know.
So, but let me just open this up a little bit, because we're gonna have, you know, we've got a little bit of time. You know, there are folks within the Latino community, or even, you know, who are Hispanic, and we can talk about the difference, who identify as being white.
And that's because, okay. Yeah, and that's okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna, and this is, yeah, you know, and I have to be real honest that there was a caller that had some issue with how I was showing up, and I told him that he was Black too. He didn't like that. And I think that when you look at the Latinx community, it's mixed, right? There are some Latinos who are not from the Caribbean diaspora, right? That their ancestry has nothing to do. There's Spaniard, there's Spain, you know, they're Venezuelans. There's different types of Latinos that would never claim Black roots because their ancestors didn't come from Africa, right? And I think that that's okay and that's real. We're not gonna force them to choose that, but they are at least they are brown, right? And I think that even Latinx folks will not even want to claim brown either. They just straight up white. Go ahead.
I have to say, because two things. One, I'm going to big up my sister. My sister, Dr. Erica Edwards, actually studies the Afro-Latino diaspora, and her specific study was on Black Argentinian folks and their history, okay? And you want to talk about a country that denies Blackness, indigenous race, Argentina has a horrible history about that. So I just want to, literally the book she wrote was The Making of a White Nation, The Role of Black Women.
Yeah.
And that book's, book's for sale. The book's for sale on Amazon right now. Anyway, so, and so she's educated me greatly about this, right? Because I think what we need to make clear about how we're colonizing this conversation on race. We're acting like what people cannot stand with Americans is we have decided how people are also going to define race.
That's right.
The way Julia is speaking about race sounds to me like the American understanding, which is the one drop rule. Mm-hmm. You have some, you are all Black. That's a colonized, that's an oppressive definition of race because it's coming from us and being placed on other countries. Mm-hmm. Let's hold ourselves accountable. Not all countries have defined race that way.
Good.
Right? In Latin America, you can become white. So you have to acknowledge that, right?
Tell us how that come, like, break it down, Lydia, break it down.
No, let me break it down for you. First of all, let's be clear, it's not a mixture of, like, countries in Latin America have defined race. I think in Mexico at one point there were 30 different races, 30, all right? But the way it was in terms of whiteness was not considered a straight line of you were in or out like in the United States. Whiteness was something that could be earned, and it was based off of how you looked, your phenotype. So the lighter you could become, the closer to whiteness and privilege you would be. Everybody had, to a certain extent, some sort of Black or indigenous ancestry. So they knew they couldn't have those strict quote unquote blood tests that the United States were using. They didn't. They just, thank you very much, there's now 8 different races in the Dominican Republic during the 1600s. So whiteness was something to be obtained. Mm-hmm. So that's why when we talk about, like, again, when we speak, you are or are not Black or white, let's not forget as Americans, this is the one thing people cannot stand about us, one of the many, is how we choose to define what is in other countries.
Lydia,
Right.
can you tell us the name of the book again? Because I got some people hollering at me. They want to know the name of the book and the author. Spit it out again.
Okay, the author is Dr. Erica Edwards, my twin, my roommate. So she is a professor in Latin American studies right now at UNC Charlotte. She got the PhD to back it up. She lived in Argentina.
Letters behind her name?
Yes.
Huh?
I said she got letters
She
behind
got
her name.
letters and letters. Yes, Dr. Erica Edwards, and she is obviously my best friend and my twin sister, but also she was doing this when she was in her early 20s. 10 years she spent in Argentina in the archives studying Black people there. She found the people who integrated their universities, found the whole back and forth about interracial marriage, and it's the making of a white nation.
Mm.
The other piece of paper, and what I'll do when I stop talking is I'll post the links to it. But the other, she wrote a paper called "An African Tree Has White Flowers." Again, about Argentina.
Oh, nice.
So this has been the study of her life, and making sure we understand and why she says it's way more complicated. When I visited Argentina, how could I ever look an Argentine with German descendancy and tell him he's a Black man, or that, even if he has Black roots? Now, there's a reckoning that needs to come in that country, all countries, on race, and specifically in that one, because it goes beyond saying who they are. They literally say Black people don't exist. That's a reckoning that needs to happen, right? Black Argentines exist now. They've always existed. And that's what my sister kind of goes through as well. And she tells the story of the whitening of this nation through, I think, 4 Black women in her book.
So now let's connect that.
That's all I want to say. So I'm still talking.
No. So I don't want you to feel like you have to, because I think this is an important conversation, because you're absolutely right. Not that you need me to validate it, but I'm validating in this moment that so much of what we talk about when we talk about race is through a US lens. And in this moment, there's this in this country, we're having this conversation about race. And, we've got this conversation going on about race that is very binary. It's like, what are you? Pick, choose today where you stand. And so how does, specifically in what Councilor Mejia was sharing and what you've shared, Councilor Edwards, and certainly Councilor Campbell, if you want to jump in, because I see you over there, how does what we know about this issue globally impact how we are or should be moving here in the States as we're tackling this issue of race? Because there are these questions now, coming up, specifically within the Latinx community. We also see it a little bit in the Black community. I'm just gonna put it out there. Our brothers and sisters who, are from different parts of the diaspora, who may have immigrated to this country, see things differently too. So how does what you shared, let me frame it this way. Why does it matter to the conversation that we're having today in this country about racial justice?
For me, why did it matter?
Yep.
I'll just say this: we cannot talk about decolonization and anti-oppression and be oppressive at the same time. And if you study at all U.S. history, our dominance of definitions of anything, right? What is clean, what is good, what is happy, what is sad, what is a good movie, what is not a good movie, it has been informed by not only just white supremacy, but the American exceptionalism that all of us, including Black Americans,
Yes,
have also bought into, to the degradation of all other nations, okay? To whether it be Ireland, be it African nations, be it Latin American nations, be it anything that is anyone who is not American, or from the US, I should say, even, because I'm doing the same thing by saying America, right? From the US.
good.
So let's just acknowledge that. So when we go to talk about race, and we're talking about folks from other nations coming here, first talk about how we are approaching this subject. And it's okay if we want to say we are going to approach it from an American perspective of race, which is the one drop rule. We acknowledge that this is just a perspective. It informs our census. It informs how we count people here. Perfectly fine. But that's all I want us to acknowledge.
Good. Anyone else want to jump in? I have something else to say on this. So the other piece, though, I want to pull the thread through this, and that is, you know, in this moment, as we're talking about race and talking about racial justice, I think we need to be clear that, you know, this is an issue for all of us to take on. It's not an issue just for Black folks or for white folks or for Latinx folks or API or however you identify. It is an issue for all of us to take on. That being said, I do think, you know, to your point, Councilor Edwards, looking at this issue through a US lens, I do think it's important for us to acknowledge the role that white supremacy and white privilege plays, right? And what it means. I think what, you know, Councilor Mejia put it on the table in this moment is that, you know, we have been fighting against in this country an anti-Black movement, right? This notion that Black is bad. And what that has meant is that people have tried to, you know, over the course of US history, tried to separate themselves from Blackness, from being Black. And because it has been something that has been considered to be a bad thing. What I hear when I hear Councilor Mejia talk about this issue of race, and specifically within the Latinx community, is what I hear from her is really this longing for folks within the Latinx community not to reject Blackness, not to see it as something as being negative, but to see it as something that can be embraced. And so I think, you know, again, as we're talking about this, you know, and if we really want to take it back, I mean, all of us have Blackness in us, okay? the continent of origin is Africa. So, period. But really trying to, in this moment, you know, acknowledge the role that white supremacy plays, and how it has created this notion of anti-Blackness and created a situation from a societal standpoint where people have really tried to, again, reject the Blackness, be as, you know, distant from qualifying as Black as possible. And how do we, in this moment, as we're fighting for racial justice, also open the door for folks to say, you know, it's okay for you to embrace the fullness of who you are. And if that includes for you, you know, your Blackness and embracing your African roots, that's okay. That's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah. Could I just say to that, Tanisha, and when you talk about that longingness, this for me has been a conversation since the 80s, right? I think that, and especially in Boston, with all of the racial tension that exists, when we're looking at the busing era, when we're just looking at all the hate and the trauma that we all have been carrying in this country in general, I think that now more than ever is our opportunity to really right the wrong and have a different conversation. And I asked you a question a month or so ago, and we were doing the Black and Brown breakdown in this Woke Woman Wednesday show, and I was like, so what's up with my Latinx communities, right? Because there's always the same usual suspects that show up and are speaking about issues that are impacting the Black community. And I think that I am very disappointed in some of our Latinx leaders who have not risen up to the occasion to really recognize that this conversation is not the time to think about what about us. right? And I know that politically, you know, but I'm not here for political points because I didn't run with that in mind. And for me, it's not about winning. It's about being real. And it's about really pushing people to recognize that if we're really serious about bringing our people together, and that means all of us, that we need to come into the space recognizing that there's a lot of inequities that have existed in this country for far too long. And if we're not ready to do the work that centers it around the issues that we all have been hoping to fight for, then it's just going to be a lot of us versus them.
Yeah.
And it's that whole, the plantation owner, I think it's Willie Lynch, or there was some guy that everybody talks to me about that I have to Google and learn a little bit more about, but it's like this Willie Lynch syndrome, is that it's set up in a way that we continue to divide ourselves and our own little clans and fighting for our own, when we're realizing that unless we all unite and break down this beast, we're all going to continue to spin our wheels. And I think that the Latinx community in particular, regardless of how you identify or whatever, regardless of whatever plantation you came from or you led at one point, that at the end of the day, that we need to get real, and we need to be honest, and we need to be accountable for how we show up in all spaces, and centering it on real talk. And I think that goes for the API community, it's just for all communities. And I think that this moment in time, we can't give ourselves a pass, Tanisha.
Yeah, no.
We can't give ourselves a pass.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I see Councilor Campbell wants to come in.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just thank you for creating this space, right? This has been just a powerful, wonderful conversation in morning, right? Spending this time with you guys, you ladies. And, you know, I see it as twofold. One, I want to say, like, thank you, Councilor Edwards, for the knowledge, for the framing, for that deeper understanding, right? That I think is critically important, and enough of us don't know enough about what she's talking about. So, and I, you know, I'm sort of like, put a pin in that, Andrea, because you have to go deeper yourself.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to the definition we have here in the States and why it's so relevant to what's happening right now. I mean, for us, we already know it's always been relevant. It's been relevant since the day we were born. From how the generations, our parents, how they've shown up, you know, why relatives in my family were just so angry, it seemed like, what was wrong? You know, this racism has been there since we were born, right? But now it's critically important to talk about, and I see it as twofold, which picks up on what all of you have been saying. One is the inequities that we talk about, the systems that we want to reform to show up equitably for every single resident in the city of Boston, specifically for our Black and Brown residents, that we have to talk about race and racism. Because if we don't, then the reason those communities exist the way they do, the reason people aren't doing well is, you know, it's their fault. This whole personal responsibility narrative, which we know is a total mistake if you know the history of this country, but specifically if you know the history of Boston, right? How can you talk about education and not talk about busing? And there are so many folks who are in policy positions charged with changing these systems who don't know anything about busing, who can't define don't have any definition of race and racism. So of course for them, well, the reason that those neighborhoods don't have good schools, well, you know, that community ain't showing up to create a good school, or there's some personal narrative or personal responsibility at play. And we know that when you talk about race and racism, whether it's policies, laws that explicitly excluded Black folks from achieving and gaining opportunity, and also at the same time devaluing their humanity, creating more stress in those communities, more attachment to coping mechanisms that are unhealthy, health inequities, all of that. When you understand that, of course, you're going to approach the work in a very different way. You're going to look at systems reform, inviting those folks to be a part of the solutions and not making them the problem. And so I think it is critically important that we talk about race and have working definitions of these things in order to not continue to perpetuate inequities. But on the flip side, and this is really getting at what you were talking about, Tanisha, which I think is so critically important. It's like naming, I'm Black and I'm proud, right? I am Black and I'm resilient. I'm a Black woman and I am fabulous. I am not inferior, I am superior. I am incredible, I am awesome. I mean, the list of adjectives, when you look in the mirror, right, to describe your humanity is so critically important. But we know because of the effects of racism on communities of color, and particularly our young people, I find myself in so many conversations with our young people who, like you said, do not embrace their Blackness because of the narrative created by this country for so long that being Black is inferior, is lesser than, is ugly, is bad. When you see the studies of young girls or boys with the doll study, picking the white doll, who's the good doll? The white doll. Who's the beautiful one? The white doll, not the Black doll. It is painful. And I think as we're doing this work of dismantling systems and naming race and racism, it's equally important, like you guys are suggesting, that we have another conversation that really pushes our young people and pushes our residents to see their Blackness as power, to see their Blackness as beautiful, to see their Blackness as resilient, to know that everything they've experienced in their life, world lookout, right? It's just preparing you and setting you up, even as unfair as it may have been, to dismantle systems, to be a part of the work, to reach your God-given potential. And I think there's so many who look at themselves still in a negative way, and it's painful to watch. And I think we don't necessarily talk about that enough and what we can do as leaders. Yeah. And it gets back to what we were talking about. When folks see us in these leadership roles, they don't care we're from Boston. They're like, oh, Councilor Campbell, I live out in Braintree.
You're
I'm happy for you to come out here and talk to my people.
Right.
But there's something there where folks, some of our own people have attached that narrative of lesser than to themselves or to their communities or to their families. And we have to address that head on too, because it does have to do with mental health and so many other things that we've all experienced, right? This is a journey. So I just appreciate you guys naming that. But on the policy piece, it is so important, and it is shocking to me how many folks do not have a deep understanding of race, racism, structural racism, and are called to dismantle systems and create new ones that won't perpetuate inequities. How do they do that? They are not equipped, and some are not willing to get that knowledge. And that's really sad and tragic for our communities.
And that's why the role of community is so important in this. And on that point, I wanna make a comment, an observation, and a comment. So, and I can say this because I have, I'm here with the sisterhood. And
the brotherhood. The chat is up in here too.
I know, but I'm talking about you.
Oh.
I'm talking about you, Lydia and Andrea, right now.
Oh, okay.
But specifically because I also think within our communities, there can sometimes be, we are incredibly diverse, and we all come to this conversation with something to offer. Councilor Mejia, you mentioned we all bring our grain of salt, right? We all have something to offer. And I think that's important for us to hold on to and understand that it may look different for, depending upon who's bringing it or how we're bringing it. We needed as much from Councilor Edwards from an academic standpoint, when she, brought her, her sister's book to the table, and her sister's research, her sister's study to the table. We needed that academic perspective to help inform, to help deepen our understanding of this issue. And we needed that just as much as, Councilor Mejia, your personal experience. Okay, both of them were needed and are needed in these conversations. And I think as a people, as a collective people, those of us who are in this fight for freedom and justice, is going to be important for us to remember that the personal lived experience is just as valuable as the academic studied experience in this. We need it all. We need it all in this fight. Okay, and so we have to be very conscious as a people not to allow wedges to say, oh, well, you know, if you haven't lived it, you have nothing to say about this conversation. Or, oh, if you haven't studied it, then you really don't know. Okay, that ain't it. We need all of it. Because again, we are fighting against systems that do not want to change. And anytime you're in a battle like this, having all of the resources, all of the weaponry, all of the tools available, that's what's going to help us win.
Yeah.
So I love that dynamic. I also want to say, you know, that this conversation, and I appreciate what Councilor Campbell said too, there's so much more for all of us to learn. Because we can't lead if we are not in a constant process of learning and deepening our own understanding. And so I would love for us to, you know, continue this, particularly this part of the conversation, and unpack it a little bit more. Not for the purpose of trying to bring folks down, but really for the purpose of trying to, again, kind of deepen our own collective understanding so that we can draw closer to one another.
Yeah. Could I just say something really quick? I think that one of the things that I've learned, and I'm all about growing in public. I feel like sometimes people have this assumption that you're supposed to be all well put together, but I've learned so much even in the last 6 months, even around race and all this, is that you and I, Tanisha, had the conversation about the barbershops and the Latinx, and I called it black and brown and immigrant, and you were like, immigrant, why that? You know, why did you bring the layer of immigrant into that conversation? And, you know, what I mentioned to her was that we had learned during our focus groups and doing the intake is that a lot of folks who weren't born in this country or didn't go to school here and had access issues with just the language and in itself were struggling as immigrants in the business community, right? But that doesn't necessarily negate that it's all about them and the immigrant community. It's just like, it's just an additional barrier, an additional layer that when we're talking about how do we support small businesses, that we bring it into the fold, right? But even something as simple as that, right? Where we're creating space for immigrants just to define and self-isolate in their own little silo can be dangerous, right? So it's how do we bring them into the conversation and help them see themselves as a part of the larger conversation so that they just don't think it's just about the immigrant businesses. And I think that is one of the things that I've been learning in my tone and how I'm presenting information and being really super mindful of how these things can land.
So I want to put a fine point on that because I want to make sure, right. And so that was in the context, like a perfect example. That was in the context we were talking about race and we were talking about Black community, Latinx community. And so when we were talking about immigrants, we were talking about Black and brown immigrants. And so my question was, well, why do we have to, if we're talking about Black and brown people are there is an immigrant community within the Black and brown community. Why are we calling it out as an other versus including it into our conversation and our advocacy when we're talking about Black and brown folk? And so what also came out of that for me as a learning, and it has been affirmed not just in my conversation with you, Julia, but also some other folks who work specifically around immigrant advocacy within the immigrant community, is what you said in terms of and this goes back to what Councilor Edwards was saying, because our definition of race in this country, because of how we think about race in this country, it is so different from how the rest of the world or much of the world thinks about it. When even folks within our community, Black folks or Latinx folks who are immigrants come here, their first thinking is not I'm Black, or not necessarily that I'm Black or I'm Latinx, let me put on the race label. The first thinking for many is I'm an immigrant, and here are the challenges or the barriers that I see in this country as a result of my immigration status. And so that has been very interesting for me to learn more about, and also just to be more conscientious of. Because, you know, as a Black American, someone who, you know, I identify as a Black American, my roots for as far back as I can go, I don't have the privilege of being able to identify where in Africa my people are from. I can tell you what, you know, county in Virginia we toiled the land in, but that's as far as I can go. You know, when I think about this issue, it's straight Black. It's like we're all in this together. It's a fight for the freedom and liberation of Black people. And so when I think about the issue with respect to immigration, it has been just a wonderful learning experience for me to be even, again, more intentional in my language about making sure that I'm identifying the unique challenges that that folks in our immigrant community, be they Black, Brown, AAPI, or whatever, may be facing. So I appreciate you helping me on that journey.
And I can't believe it's 11:59, and I swear, like, this has been like the best way to spend my Saturday morning. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm in New Hampshire. And so my family's like, you are such a workaholic, but this is so in my heart. I love this. And I think it's important for us to continue, not just to have these conversations in these spaces, but to have these conversations in our dinner tables, that when we're talking with our friends and with our loved ones and our families. And, you know, I just think that that is part of what the work is about. It is a constant being in community and conversation about these things that are really challenging. And I think that we didn't set out, Tanisha and I did not set out to change the hearts and minds of everybody in this world with this one conversation, but what we did want to do is create space for the community to connect with the council, to connect with each other. And I know we called it a town hall, and you know, we did have some comments on our chat and that we brought in, but what we're really trying to do is create space. And maybe the next conversation that we host, we will not be the featured speakers. We will create space for those who are living these realities out here, and to lead the conversation. This was, I think, Tanisha and I are always very organic when we join forces, and so, you know, I'm really grateful to have you as someone who I can always call upon, who I know will always be 100% with me on what I need to do, and just your support has always just been part of my little weapon. So thank you for asking the question last week on Facebook, for creating a space for us to, you know, come together in sisterhood, right? Because one thing that we did not say that I think it's important for people to know is that the way the charter is written, and you know, we got Lydia, who is like she's the one in the family that understands the
guru.
Yeah, like, you know, the way, and I didn't know this. I thought coming in that we were all going to be able to work together, and that, but yo, there's like laws in place where four of us can't even be in one room together. And it's just crazy that we can't work in the spirit of collaboration, even within the council, because the way the charter is written. Lydia, you want to tell people why and what it is, so that they know why we can't be like working in a unit and working collaboratively all the time? Can you tell us why?
It's called open meeting laws, and those laws apply only to us, not to your state house members. So while that's why we created and essentially have the working session, so that they could be all of us in a room discussing and talking publicly for the folks to hear us discuss and negotiate and express our concerns about a law. We are not supposed to, I'm chair of the Government Ops Committee. There's several committee members, you know, on there, but as a committee, we could not meet and caucus and discuss what's before us. In the State House, they regularly do that. The Housing Committee will meet and talk to each other. It's more than it's three and up of us. And so that's a problem, right? So what that means is we almost by design have to be siloed if we want to have direct communication. Otherwise, it's open to the whole world. And I mean, but we still get stuff done. I just, my bone to pick is that it doesn't apply to my brothers and sisters in the state house. So either lift it
Notice
or it
that.
applies to all of us. It's a fair, I think it's a fair criticism though. I think people, if it's about transparency and open government, then it should be open all forms and all levels of it.
Yeah.
That's all.
And that's why these spaces, Tanisha, are really important, because this is a public forum. And these are the spaces where we can continue to be engaged and informed by the people.
Yeah.
And then we can bring these back into our spaces to develop policy, to develop what are we going to do, and action plans as a result of these convenings. And I think that what we have been able to do as counselors, I think, is find other ways to move the work forward, despite these restrictions that we have.
Absolutely.
So close us out.
Super helpful. This was fantastic. What a blessing it was to be joined by Councilor Campbell and Councilor Edwards for the entire duration. This is great and so important. And I hope that we do more of it. And truly, and you're right, Julie, I think it's important to have, the organic conversations, like, very authentic, so that we can get to the issues, so that we can get to the questions that people have. And I think from a leadership standpoint, it's important for people to see us, in a state of, again, not just informing, but also in the learning process as well, in a very authentic way. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your leadership, Councilor Campbell. Thank you for your leadership, Councilor Edwards, and really all the work that you all are doing on behalf of all of us across the city of Boston, to help make our community, to help make our city a more equitable, more just, more inclusive city. Thank you for that work. Thank you for that labor. We see you and we want to continue to work in partnership with you, specifically during this time. So thank you.
And thank you,
ladies.
Tanisha Sullivan, for your leadership and for posing the question and pushing and working in the front lines, behind the scenes, on the sidewalks, everywhere you go, to continue bringing our people forward. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to all who joined us on Facebook and in the live chat, and all of the folks that have engaged and continue to do so.
And your amazing team.
And my amazing team. Yo, let's give it up. We do have the squad: Cisnell, Jacob, Natalie, Brady, Sandra, Maggie. I mean, like, we have a crew that is so committed to the people, and I'm very fortunate to have such an amazing team who go in all day, every day for us. So thank you, y'all. Love y'all.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.